The day I married Daniel, I thought I'd finally found my forever family. His parents, John and Mary, welcomed me with open arms, and for years our lives were woven together with laughter, holidays, and Sunday dinners. Daniel was the center of my world, a kind, brilliant man who made every day feel like an adventure. We had our son, Leo, and our little family felt complete. Perfect. But perfection is fragile. A single phone call, a doctor's somber voice, and our world shattered. Daniel had a rare, aggressive illness. The man who was my rock, my everything, was suddenly fighting for his life. The months that followed were a blur of hospital visits, treatments, and sleepless nights. I never left his side, holding his hand through every painful procedure. John and Mary were there too at first. They'd bring meals, sit with Daniel, and offer words of support. But as the medical bills piled up, a subtle shift began. Their visits became shorter, their calls less frequent. I started hearing whispers, hushed conversations about the financial drain Daniel's illness was causing. I tried to ignore it, focusing all my energy on my husband. We had savings, insurance, we would manage. Daniel needed love, not financial anxiety. One afternoon, while Daniel was asleep, I overheard a phone call between John and his brother. They were talking about a business investment, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that required a significant amount of capital due on a specific date. A cold dread washed over me as I realized the date they were discussing was just a few weeks away. I confronted them, asking if they were thinking of pulling money from Daniel's care fund. They denied it, of course, calling me hysterical and overly emotional. But I saw the guilt in their eyes. They looked away, unable to meet my gaze. It was the first crack in the facade of our happy family, a crack that would soon splinter into a chasm. Daniel fought bravely, but the illness was relentless. He passed away on a quiet Tuesday morning, holding my hand, his last breath a soft sigh. The pain was immense, a physical weight that crushed my chest. In the midst of my grief, I had to plan a funeral, a final goodbye for the love of my life. I called John and Mary, my voice trembling, and told them the news. There was a pause on the line, a beat of silence that felt unnervingly long. Then, Mary's voice, strangely detached, said, "Oh dear, that's terrible. We'll have to see about our schedules." Schedules? My husband, their son, was gone, and they were checking their schedules? I was too numb to process the absurdity of it. I gave them the date for the funeral, assuming they would, of course, be there. How could they not be? A few days later, a sympathy card arrived in the mail. Inside was a generic message and a check. It felt cold, transactional. There was no phone call, no visit, just a check, as if that could replace their presence. The day of the funeral arrived, a grey, somber day that mirrored the emptiness inside me. Friends and family filled the pews, their faces etched with sadness. I stood at the front, holding 10-year-old Leo's hand, my eyes scanning the crowd for John and Mary. They weren't there. The seats I had reserved for them remained starkly, painfully empty. My brother-in-law, Daniel's brother, approached me after the service, his expression full of pity. He awkwardly explained that his parents had an unavoidable business commitment they couldn't get out of. He mumbled something about an investment deadline. The pieces clicked into place, sharp and cruel. The whispered phone call, the due date, their absence. They had chosen money over their own son's funeral. A wave of nausea and white-hot anger washed over me. I couldn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it. How could they be so heartless? The weeks following the funeral were a lonely, grief-stricken haze. I focused on Leo, trying to be strong for him, even as I was falling apart. He was a quiet child, but he saw everything. He saw my tears, he saw the empty chairs at the funeral, and he heard the silence where his grandparents' calls should have been. One evening the doorbell rang. It was John and Mary, standing on my doorstep with forced smiles and a casserole dish. "We're so sorry we missed the service," Mary said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "This business deal was just, well, it was for the family's future." I wanted to scream, to throw them out, to tell them what I thought of their family future. But I was exhausted, drained of all fight. I just numbly let them in. They sat on the sofa, The same sofa where Daniel and I used to cuddle and watch movies, and they started talking about their successful investment. They boasted about the returns, the profits, how this would secure everyone's future. They were talking about money, gleefully, in the house where their son's memory was still a raw, open wound. It was surreal, monstrous. Leo had been sitting quietly in the corner, building with his Legos. He hadn't said a word since they arrived. As they chattered on about their financial triumph, he suddenly stood up, his small face serious and pale. He walked over and stood directly in front of them. "You know," he said, his voice small but clear as a bell, "Dad always told me that the richest people aren't the ones with the most money. They're the ones with the most love." John and Mary stopped talking, their smiles faltering. They stared at him, stunned into silence. Leo wasn't finished. He looked them straight in the eye, his own filled with a wisdom far beyond his years. "You have a lot of money now," he continued, his voice steady. "But you weren't there to say goodbye to your son. You missed it. You sold your love for Dad for some money, so I guess you're not rich at all. You're the poorest people I know." The silence that followed was deafening. The air in the room grew thick with shame. Mary's face crumpled, and John just stared at the floor, his face ashen. They had no response. What could they possibly say? A 10-year-old boy had just stripped away all their justifications and exposed the ugly truth of their choice. He had held up a mirror, and they were horrified by the reflection. They mumbled some excuses, gathered their things, and left without another word. They never brought up the investment again. In fact, their calls and visits dwindled to nothing. It was as if Leo's words had drawn a line in the sand that they were too ashamed to cross. I was, and still am, incredibly proud of my son. In his simple, profound statement, he had defended his father's memory and spoken a truth more powerful than any amount of money. He taught me that day that even in the deepest grief there is strength, and that the legacy we leave behind isn't in our bank accounts, but in the love we give. Daniel would have been so proud of his boy. We're doing okay, Leo and I. We have each other, and we have the priceless inheritance Daniel left us, a wealth of love. And that's something no amount of money can ever buy. Thank you for listening to our story. If you've been through a similar experience with grief and family, know that you're not alone. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart.